All right, welcome back to Deconstructing DJG. I am DJG, otherwise known as Noel, and I have something very different for us today. I am talking with Amanda Rosenbloom Morton. They are a counterterrorism scholar with Middlebury Institute of International Studies. Her research lies at the nexus of terrorism and technology and targeted violence prevention. Today, we are going to be talking about something that is very prescient within the fundy snark kind of thing. Last year, Ruby Franke of the Eight Passengers YouTube channel and her business partner Jodi Hildebrandt were arrested for aggravated child abuse for her two youngest children. There have been rumors and theories about abuse that has been going on in the Franke household for years. People who watched them started picking up on this stuff fairly early. Ruby has always been one to kind of delight in the discipline of her children, and so did a lot of very suspect things, taking away their rooms, denying them food and water, making them do manual labor, etc., for seemingly very small infractions. And so it really, unfortunately, was not a terrible surprise to us that she and Jodi got arrested. It was mostly a surprise in that we didn't think that that would ever happen. We figured they'd get away with it. And they're actually not getting away with it. But as evidence has been released on this coup, if you go looking for the images and the video, prepare yourself, take care of yourself, know when you need to tap out. It is incredibly disturbing to see just how far they had started to take it. If R had not escaped and gotten help, I fear that R and E would both have not lived much longer. So we are going to be talking about the kind of background on that, the kind of cult theology, not cult theology, the cult psychology, looking at how these things happen, and talking about the mercy and forgiveness that Ruby and Jodi claim to be receiving from God, and how we feel about that in terms of justice and whatnot. So Amanda, any little beginning things that you want to say as we get started?
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Noel. I want to provide some coverage today that takes a different approach because, I'm a counterterrorism researcher, and in my own life, I research the worst people alive, and I've had to find ways to do that and preserve my sanity. And one thing I really encourage people is it is absolutely possible to take action on issues that you feel passionate about without subjecting yourself to the footage. You can take our word that it's horrific. And I kind of have a similar attitude in my study of domestic violent extremists. There's a lot of concern, there's a lot of academic study of their manifestos and really dissecting their, like, each little component of their ideology. But in my own research, I've found relatively little value in that level of studying these manifestos and that level of taking them at their face value, that that's the true reason why they are carrying out acts of terrorism.
Yeah.
What I found is it is much more rooted in their participation in a hyper-violent culture that dehumanizes the other, whatever that other is, because that other can shift and change depending on how they feel that day. But the core thing motivating, a lot of these extremist mass shooters. I'm talking about the Christchurch massacre. I'm talking about the Buffalo Tops Market supermarket massacre. When you actually get to the bottom of it, the real motivation is their dehumanization of the other. And, it's relatively immaterial and pick and choose, like the particular strain of ideology that they use to justify their actions. And so I was hoping to provide that sort of perspective on this case, especially when we get to looking at Franke's and Hildebrandt's statements to the court. And I want to provide a legal analysis, first of all, at what their legal strategies might be. And then I want to unpack that further and say, hey, we can't really take these people at the face value of their words. And let's go further from there.
Awesome. That sounds like a plan. They were arrested for aggravated child abuse. They have at this point been convicted. They pled guilty. Both of them pled guilty immediately. They have been sentenced to the maximum that is allowable in Utah. Utah has some kind of funky sentencing stuff. So they are going to be sentenced for, I think it's 5 to 15 years, or is it 1 to 15 years?
Oh, sorry, that's not the maximum. Sorry. So are you saying which charge or overall?
No, per charge.
Yeah, per charge one. Yeah, you're correct. One to
Okay,
15, but Utah caps the
at 30.
overall consecutive sentence at 30. Correct.
Exactly. So theoretically, they could have, 15 times four because they were convicted on four charges each, which would get up to 60. But like you said, Utah caps it at 30 grand total. But that at least ensures that they won't be out until the children are not minors anymore, or very close to not minors anymore. So the way that Utah does it is the judge doesn't actually pick the sentence exactly. He will say, they are eligible for the maximum. And then the Utah Parole Board will actually take over from there and then every so many years review their case and decide if they can be released. And I swear to God, I'm pretty sure I, along with many, will riot if Ruby gets released after just like 1 or 2 years. Um, we've had a lot of discussions about should Ruby or Jodi get the longer sentence, because Jodi is the professional involved and she has impacted other lives as well as these two kids. Um, it seems like, maybe she has a fair amount of extra culpability. In my perspective, because Ruby is the parent, that parent has a legal responsibility to protect that child. And so, because she intentionally defaulted on that, I feel like she almost deserves a worse sentence. But yeah, they need to stay locked up for a good long time because they are not safe for the outside world. They had the sentencing for Ruby, I want to say it was the end of January, and then I believe Jodi was the middle of February. Um, in both of them, it was very telling to watch their statements to the judge because they all, get to make a statement as they're, going into the sentencing. And Ruby's was an Oscar worthy performance of how how convicted she was of what a terrible thing she did, and it's so awful, and she is, seeking God's forgiveness and mercy, and hopes the children are able to heal and recover. And then Jodi was basically like, uh I mean, she was so like textbook movie serial killer kind of vibe. And she says that in her very very brief statement, like, Ruby went on and on and on, right? Jodi was like this teeny tiny little statement basically saying that all she wants is that the kids get help. Neither of you have been locked up long enough to really adequately digest what you have done and like come to any kind of reality as far as that is concerned. So it came off as very, very fake. for both of them. But it was interesting to see how Ruby really wants to play to, oh, I can look really, contrite, and Jodi just doesn't give a fuck.
I'm just gonna get the legal stuff out of the way. But okay, so I'm just gonna put my legal hat on here and say, you're exactly right. Judy's statement is clear that, at the very least, she is listening to good lawyers,
Yeah,
because this is an incredible statement from, from a legal perspective, and probably the thing that serves her best interest. Jodi, on the other hand, does not admit any wrongdoing, does not express remorse or even admit to taking actions that were harmful. And yeah, that's really the end of the day. All she says is that she loves these kids and wants to spare them from the trial, which does not take ownership of any of her participation. I want to flip back to Ruby for a second. And in her rather long statement, um, she pretends to take responsibility, but I want to draw you to one quote, and this is where she addresses her children. She says, I would never have led you to darkness knowingly. I was so disoriented that I believed dark was light and right was wrong. And to me, this is her is still refusing to take responsibility and throwing blame at the feet of Jodi, and somehow implying that, Jodi has this power to force Ruby to torture her own children to death. So I
exactly.
just want to point out, yeah, that, like, Oscar winning performance, correct. Like, exactly what her lawyers advised her to say, correct.
Hmm.
But I still don't see her taking the true ownership for her
Hmm.
actions.
No, not at all. And the way that she tried to throw it all as a Jodi thing, I was, you know, pulled into the Jodi cult. Or I think it's funny they have used the word distorted so often in their trial statements when their whole thing has been everyone else is living in distortion. And so now Ruby is talking about how things are so distorted, and Jodi distorted things for her, and that's why she did horrible things to her children. But it's stuff that she had already started before meeting Jodi. Jodi was just kind of this like catalyst to really amp up the level of abuse that was going on. I think it's worth mentioning that Kevin has been fairly complicit in all of this. He has tried to distance himself and saying, Jodi had forced a split between him and Ruby. Um, so he didn't know what was going on, but those early things that Ruby was doing to her kids years before Jodi, he was fully there for. So I am really hesitant to accept the statements that he has made thus far. And he has done the same to throw everything at Jodi. It was never them before the Jodi influence.
I want to say to that, yeah, Kevin, we can take things at face value or we can look at the reality of the situation. But for a moment, I'm going to take Kevin at face value. And he's been making the media circuit tour, go listing on and on about, how horrible it was to live once Jodi moved into his house. But let's take him at face value. He saw this woman exerting increasing control and abuse towards his children and his wife, and he accepted her orders to leave his own house and to leave his family for over a year. And so let's take him at face value and assume that he did not know the level of abuse that was taking place while he was gone. The fact of the matter is, within their version of Christianity, he is the male headship and he has the ultimate authority over his own house. If he thought that she was possessed and she was so evil, then why didn't he take action then?
Exactly. He's her priesthood holder. He is the priesthood holder for his children. He is absolutely the where the buck is supposed to stop when it comes to what happens in the household. The Mormon subset, I think is pretty similar to like the IFB, where you have the extremely strict patriarchal things. There's, a something of an obsession about making sure that your appearances are great, and the fact that he for years allowed them to, exploit the children and to publicly discuss and show abuse of the children. Yeah, that's not a priesthood I want to be a part of. Not that I've ever been excited about Mormonism, but it's just very interesting to see how when legal justice comes to call, they are suddenly like, oh no, I couldn't do anything. And as soon as they're like in the church or speaking about that, they are absolutely in charge and they got this down. I can't see it as anything other than completely disingenuous.
Well, I mean, by his own standards, he failed his family.
Yeah,
He he gave up his responsibility and he ceded his power to someone he believed was possessed.
exactly. A
Would you leave your
woman,
kids
no
if you
less.
thought
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
so? And now, okay, we're on the subject of Mormonism. What I
Yes.
had something in particular to say about that. Yeah, so yeah, let's go back to that. The reason that we have so much documentation of this is because they were under the delusional belief that their recordings of the abuse of their children would be one day included in the Mormon holy texts.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't speak to a level of grandiose delusion, I don't know what does.
There is a huge amount of grandiosity. You can look across the spectrum. You've got the charismatic prophets, that are self-named prophets. You have Greg Locke, Mark Driscoll.
And Ballard,
There we go, Tim Ballard. But you have these insanely grandiose people who really do like sincerely think that they are sent from God. They are the mouthpiece of God. The way that Tim Ballard in Sound of Freedom made his own character just so much bigger and more perfect and everything than he actually is in real life. And he actually did an interview with a Catholic group recently and said that he and his family were considering a conversion from Mormonism to Catholicism. And he was like, yeah, I'm wearing this miraculous medal or something like that. It's a icon of a particular form of Catholicism. But I was like, oh, that's sure, buddy. You're getting disavowed by the LDS leaders, and they're like, "Oh no, Tim Ballard, we don't know him." So gee, I wonder why you're now switching over to a different high control group that has a history of abuse against women and children. The focus keeps going on the wrong thing and the wrong people, and you look at this and you're like, how do the people in charge not notice that this person is full of shit? I think that for people like me coming out of a high control group, um, I think sometimes we can spot bullshit faster, and we've had to unpack and discover the bullshit that we were fed and the bullshit that we have ended up telling ourselves because it was programmed into us, and realizing, oh, that's how that works. The terribly depressing part that a lot of us get to is that it it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things that we were abused. There is no justice for us. And so I think a lot of us can also kind of latch on to cases like Ruby and Jodi and be like, yes, finally somebody is getting some justice. It's been interesting to note the differences between how Utah handles cases like this and other states have handled similar cases. My mind goes immediately to California with the Turpins. I did not think it was that bad, but apparently it was. Do you know anything about the Turpin case as far as like the legal side is concerned?
Is that the one where they drove off the road? Or
No.
who's the
Uh
one who drove off the road?
so that's the one where they had like 8 kids, 10 kids, something like that. They were all confined to like boarded up, hidden off room in their house. Sometimes they were chained, they were starved, etc. And the eldest daughter managed to escape, go get help, and now the kids are all, in various states of being in state custody, being very young adults trying to do this stuff on their own, and thankfully, getting uh, support from government agencies as far as therapy and housing and food and all that good jazz. But they got taken advantage of again afterwards because there was this giant GoFundMe that was done for them. And as far as I know, they have not received a penny of that. Whoever put it together has like siphoned off the money to other people. That's the kind of like stolen justice that we see so often with these cases. And I think part of what complicates the legal side is that CPS is or DHS, depending on your state, um, is pretty hamstrung unless there is some really hard evidence that abuse is going on, and it takes a lot of calls to actually get things moving. Um, and when you have kids who are homeschooled, such as the Turpins and the Franke kids, it's a lot easier to have that abuse fly under the radar. And the fact that Ruby was able to broadcast on YouTube the abuse. So we had video confirmation of this stuff happening, and yet it still took 10 plus calls to have CPS go out there before they actually got caught. And the only reason they actually got caught was not one of those CPS reports, it was the child escaping and getting help, just like the Turpins.
Yeah,
So
CPS failed them. The investigation failed them.
absolutely, absolutely. And there's so much in America pushing for these parents' rights. And the, Homeschool Legal Defense Association and similar organizations are really, really dedicated to pushing this parents' rights movement. And that is why we are the only country who has not signed on to the UN Rights of the Child. Because in America, we cannot get enough support, I guess, to confirm that children have a right to health care and education and all of these other things. Like there's this, parents are supposed to be the ultimate arbiters and they're my property, and so therefore you can't say anything about what I do to my children because they're my children, they are my property. There is this absence of seeing children as tiny humans. They are seen as property. And it's disturbing that you would get in more trouble for, or more immediate trouble, more effective retribution and justice if you were to harm someone's property than to harm someone's child. Because that's where Jodi is. She's not the parent. She is somebody else who harmed the children. And yet somebody who would have, say, if she had driven a car into their living room, probably would have gotten swifter and more, accurate justice. And that is just truly, truly disturbing.
Thank you for talking about the rights, and I think this is a good moment to, use this case. How you said that we saw key observers were seeing this evidence of abuse for years. They were making calls. Of course, if you're not directly in their life, it's kind of counterproductive to do so. And so this case points out that even someone broadcasting almost every aspect of their life and making money
Mm-hmm.
off of their children could still be engaging in this level of horrific abuse. And honest, like I even struggle to call it abuse because that word is not strong enough.
No, it's not.
Even in the public spotlight, horrific abuse and torture can be going on behind closed doors. And it, unfortunately wasn't a surprise that these things were happening based on what we saw on their channel. But this brings me to the point of why do we have for profit family channels on social media at all? Why is it okay for anyone to make their entire living and business based on content created by people who cannot legally consent?
Mm-hmm.
And then you think about, imagine from, okay, we hear so much stuff coming out from child actors right now about the abuse they experience in a pretty regulated industry.
Yeah.
So can you even imagine what some of these kids who are homeschooled, who are isolated from society, and their only interaction is their image being broadcast to millions of strangers,
Yep.
for that to be normalized, even just for it to be normalized to have every aspect of their life being known by strangers is problematic. And
Yeah.
it's a little bit chicken and egg here because I'm very passionate about this because I see kids on these family for-profit channels being neglected and
Mm-hmm.
abused, and I feel some kind of personal connection to them, parasocial
Yes.
relationship to them as a complete stranger. And I'm mad that I have that because I shouldn't know who they are.
Exactly. Exactly.
I want to direct listeners to the website Stop Clicking Kids.
In August of 2023, Illinois actually became the very first state to pass any kind of legislation that would impact this. And all that it does is ensure financial compensation for minors defined as children under 16 years old who are featured in vlogs or video blogs. So keep in mind that is video. So the people who do pictures, they're still not required to do any kind of compensation. And all this does is pay the children. It doesn't stop the child labor. It doesn't stop the child exploitation. It just pays the kids for it. Um, and it's again their property. So people are like, "Yep, here's my car. Here's my kid." It's all the same thing. There is this emotionally immature self obsession about look at me and look at what I have, and so they are completely blind to the danger that they put these kids in. These kids' locations are known, their names, birth dates, schools they go to, all of this stuff is known. It's really, really easy for internet sleuths, you don't even have to be that sleuthy, to find people's address based on the background that is in their pictures and videos. Um, I have lost count of the number of times that there will be questions on a snark page or something about, oh, it looks like so and so moved to a new address. And within 24 hours, like 3 different people have their new exact address. And so this puts children at extreme risk, like beyond what their parents are doing to them as far as exploiting them. They're open to so much other exploitation. You have other influencers like Carissa Collins or Brittany Lott. There's a couple of others, but those two specifically have met with followers from social media who happen to be in the area, quote unquote happen to be in the area. I don't know that all of that is coincidental, but they will love on their children is so disturbing to me because I mean, how do you have a stranger come up to you and you're like, "Yes, buy my kids things, hang out with my kids things, attach yourself emotionally to my children." Carissa, in at least one specific instance, actually had one of these followers spend the night in her house. And now, what was it? I think it was late last year. Uh, a couple that are friends with the Collins, they were charged with child sexual assault. And given the prevalence, the intense prevalence of child predation that happens in these high control groups, in these isolated homeschool groups and whatnot, where there are no mandated reporters and no one is really looking out for these kids because obviously the parents either are just, ignorant and naive and can't see it, or they just don't care. Or they think, "Oh, well, that happens to other people, not me." It's so shocking that people feel so empowered to neglect and abuse their children for clicks and views and dollars. And the best we have so far for legislation is, oh, make sure you pay the kids.
I wanted to draw our listeners' attention to quitclickingkids.com. And I agree with you, Noelle, that we need to go so much further than where the legislation is at right now. But I am
Mm-hmm.
very happy and inspired that, let's see, over 10 states have legislation in some amount of progress. The original bill that started this all was authored by a young high school girl who just simply saw a need for this and took action. So I'm very proud of
Nice.
her, and I think we need to go further. We need to go further than, like you said, just paying kids for exploitation. We need to
Mm-hmm.
give them the right and ability to opt out and to make sure that they're safe in saying no.
Yeah.
Um,
That's something that I end up talking about a lot when I am working with my homeschool support groups and whatnot. The kids do not feel safe telling their parents no. There's so much guilt from some of them where their parents, ask them, "Do you want to keep homeschooling or do you want to go back to public school?" And the parents very clearly want to continue homeschooling, but they want the out to be able to say, "Oh, well, I asked my kid, he loves homeschooling, so we're going to continue homeschooling." But that kid just wants the parent to praise them and to love them and to draw them in, and in order to do that, they're going to tell the parent what the parent wants to hear. Um it's just natural as far as what the human brain does in these familial relationships, because this is their parent. This is the person that ensures that they have a roof over their head, clothes on their back, and food in their stomach. And so if you upset that parent, even if they have not been physically abusive in the past, there is often that fear that something could happen. You don't know exactly what it would be, and sometimes the fact that it is unknown makes it scarier. Because the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. Asking kids, do you want to be part of the family vlog? Do you want to be part of our YouTube? They often can't really safely say no.
Point out that some of these kids, their conception, pregnancy, delivery, entire childhood is all on camera for anyone to watch. So if that's the case for you, does it even enter your mind that there's an option to say no?
Exactly, exactly. This is normal. This is what I've done my whole life. Why would I do something different? And I look at a lot of the influencers that have kids on their channels, and it's like the older that the kids get, the more completely over the shit they are. They might be in the video, they might technically be doing the dance moves, but you can tell that they really don't want to be there. They really don't want to be doing this thing. Carissa will consistently post videos of her kids crying in the middle of this dance number, and she's like, "Yep, that's the take that I want to post on the internet." And then gets upset when people are like, "Oh my gosh, your kids are so upset. Why are you doing this to your kids when they obviously don't like it? And then she'll come back with the kid talking about, don't you love doing this? Isn't this so much fun? And so, of course, the kid, like, yeah, I love this. There is no way to give a child autonomy and to expect them to use that autonomy when they don't have the safety and security of knowing that they will be okay if they say no. It feels very much like an abusive marriage where the spouse that's being abused just doesn't feel like they can speak up and say, "Hey, no, I don't want to do this." The coercion to sex within relationships and whatnot. It's that exact same thing because you have someone who doesn't feel like they can exercise their autonomy because the people around them have made it unsafe to do so. And I know that in the like high control group and homeschool alumni sectors, there's a whole lot of that programming of love and pain, or love and abuse are the same thing. They go hand in hand. So when they become adults and they have adult relationships, they're repeating those same patterns. And so they are so much more vulnerable to abuse. We don't have enough data really to be able to say, exactly numbers wise where that sits, but it's not an insignificant component when I'm talking to people coming out of these groups at all. And so it would not surprise me if it was a very large percentage that were dealing with these things.
I see this connection. We talked about Tim Ballard earlier, and he was actually fueling human sex trafficking. And I would point that same thing to these for-profit family channels
Mm-hmm.
who complain all day about grooming and wax philosophical about whether their 7-year-old can wear a two-piece bathing suit because it might be too sexually provocative. And I want to say the same thing to them. If you're very concerned about the other grooming your child, then stop grooming them yourself. So stop grooming them for a lifetime of abuse and unhealthy boundaries in relationships.
Exactly. I know personally, um, I got saved when I was 3 years old. I did it because
You must have been a bad kid.
I was terrified of going to hell and not being with my family in the afterlife. I couldn't bear the thought of that separation from my family of origin. And so I committed myself to a lifelong thing in a high control group at 3 years old. And then when I was five, my parents or a Sunday school, somebody had me write down a testimony, had me write down a testimony of how I got saved. And that written testimony from 5 year old me is absolutely heartbreaking to me now. I can see the just terrified toddler that has had, these intensely scary and traumatic ideas put into their head in regards to, eternity and family and whatnot. My mom had hung on to it apparently. And so a couple of years ago, she gave it to me. Uh, she told me it was a story to make sure that I read it. She didn't tell me it was my testimony. No, she said it was a story I wrote and gave it to me and in a period of time where they were really working hard to try and get me back into the church. And so I can only imagine she gave that to me to try and impress upon me about how this is something I have devoutly believed my entire life. How could I, let that go? How could I fall away from that faith? Why would I not come back to it? And I was reading it and I'm thinking this is not having the effect that you want. You want this cop out because I have told you that my high control religious upbringing harmed me, left me with trauma, and things that I am having to work through as an adult, things that have negatively impacted multiple components of my life. And they point to, well, you got saved, you chose at 3 years old to get saved, and so therefore it is not on us, you chose this. And that just, wow. How do you blame a toddler for their abuse because they quote unquote chose something that you presented as basically the only option that is not eternal conscious torment? And I see kind of similar stuff, but to a more extreme thing when I was reading through Ruby's journal. And she was talking about how the kids were possessed and they were evil and they had demons inside of them. It's the children's fault that they have these demons, and it's up to the children to act correctly to rid themselves of these demons. There's this intense campaign to make children responsible for things that happened to them before they were able. But so kids are culpable from 3 years old for all this stuff. But in other things like knowing your gender, knowing your sexuality, anything like that, oh no no no, kids can't do that. Kids don't know. Kids can't make that kind of commitment. They're like, oh, socially transitioning, medically, getting on hormone blockers or whatever. They're too young. They can't be responsible for decisions like that. That's only the adults in their lives pushing this on them, and they don't see the irony there.
Rules for me, but not for me. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to laugh at the beginning, but it was just like so ridiculous to me that the idea that a 3-year-old has anything to repent for. That I was not laughing
Right?
at you.
Unfortunately, James Dobson, Bill Gothard, etc., definitely believe that we are little sinners, straight from the womb. And I
I
mean,
learned the phrase "vipers and diapers" from you guys. I'd never heard that, and that just blew my mind.
yeah, that's it. Um, I know that my family somewhat believed in this vague idea of the age of accountability. Children are not accountable for sins until they hit a certain age. And it seems like that age is somewhere between like 6 and 8 years old. But I was 3, so I was well under the age of accountability, and I was taking accountability for being a normal toddler. And that's a pattern that I see. Kids will have completely normal, natural, developmentally appropriate, age appropriate responses, choices, etc. And the parents are like, look, see, the kid's a little sinner.
Drawing this back to Frankie a little bit, um, about the nature of free will and radicalization. So I'm putting my counterterrorism hat on here, and something that really inspired me to pursue this line of work was the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in
Oh,
Pittsburgh.
yes.
And that one particularly left a mark on me, not just the tragedy itself, but the murderer's refusal to express any kind of remorse.
Yeah.
And then when he was at trial, he was apparently enough of a coward that he didn't want to lose his own life. And so he used the insanity defense to say that, and so let's talk about what that means. So you went on Gab, and did someone put a gun to your head to consume all of this material that radicalized you? And I want to draw a parallel to, like, let's imagine, someone's on Reddit, and like maybe some common attitudes towards, uh, like, the argument, I was drunk,
Yeah.
you know, that's not me. I was drunk. I would never do something like that under normal circumstances. Well, you're refusing to take responsibility for your actions.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, like, no one gets drunk and does something that's so far outside of what they are already inclined to do,
Yes.
right? So sure, maybe alcohol facilitated it, but there is some internal part of you that was taking those actions. And I see the exact same thing in the Franke case, where did Hildebrandt, add fuel to the fire? Yes, but you can't make someone do something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
And as proof of that, there's really no such in the cultic studies community. We have moved beyond the term brainwashing. There is no such thing as brainwashing. There are high control groups that control various aspects of thought, emotion, information, and behavior. I'm referring to the BITE model by Dr. Stephen Hassan here. But those are controlling behaviors that, don't make you do anything. So why are some people in victims of high control groups and cults and never abuse anyone else? They're solely victims. And why are there other people who might be both victims and perpetrators? Um, so we can't discount the nature of free will, and we can't say, well, someone was in a high control environment, so their crimes are justified.
Right. And that's also something I've seen a good deal about in regards to Ruby trying to say that, she was brainwashed. And I can understand a certain amount of brainwashing, but like you said, the response seems to be, you take it one way or another based on underlying personality and such. The brainwashing can only go so far, and that's why some people will get into a cult, and the early people who tried to leave Jamestown, the early people that tried to leave the Manson family, etc. They pick up on it a little bit faster than some of the other people that are just in it. You see this with the what is it? Love wins. Yeah. And others where they have some adherents who are there. They are so solidly with it. They are to this day doing YouTube live streams talking about how Mother God has ascended and what's coming up next, who's going to get to join the spaceship next, and they are just so in it. But then others picked up on the little things and got out. So the fact that Ruby went whole hog on this really speaks to where her motivations lie. She wanted the fame, she wanted the attention, she wanted the money, she wanted the status of, I am this super mom. I've had all these kids and look at how well behaved they are and everything. And then in the background, behind the scenes, it's terror and torture. And other people who are Mormons, they don't do that. So it's very curious to see how the different minds work with that.
We met today because we're focused on the Frankie case, um, and her own responsibility and how much time she deserves to be in prison, which I would say is the maximum. And if she can seek forgiveness from God, that is so great. But I don't believe that the justice system has the same obligation to practice Christian God-like forgiveness. And if anything, doesn't that make God's forgiveness kind of meaningless?
Yeah. She really tried to go for the, I am um, penitent to God and I am seeking God's forgiveness and mercy for what I have done. And all of that is self-preservation. And it is this adopting something that nobody can tell you exactly where the lines are. There's a line from a song that says, if hell is forever, then heaven is a lie. If angels can do whatever and stay in the sky, the rules are all gray when you don't do what you say. And so there is this impossibility, these constantly moving goalposts about how to seek forgiveness, what will get forgiven, etc. And people like Ruby will take it to this extreme where, I don't need to take total culpability in the legal justice system because God will judge me and God will forgive me and God will give me mercy. And I have very big feelings about people like her taking on that kind of thing. there's this push for, especially within families, for children and other family members to forgive like God. And again, that constantly moving goalposts about what you need to forgive and what does forgiveness mean. And in entirely too many cases, forgiveness means that you pretend like you were not harmed by that at all. You have no lasting feelings or trauma from it at all, and it's completely in the past and has no bearing on the future. There's a sex offender registry. There should be a domestic violence and child abuse registry that people have to do, because they should not be able to get away with that in society, even beyond whatever time they spend behind bars.
On another note, because we've been talking so much about these individuals, I want to talk about the social media companies' responsibility. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, all of you are responsible. And you're creating the perfect conditions for abuse of children. And there needs to be an end to the profit motive for content featuring underage children. Full stop.
Yes.
You need to stop monetizing content featuring minors.
Yeah. That
And just
absolutely. That's
yeah,
the bare minimum, you know? The bar is in hell. We're just like, hey, don't give them money for doing this, you know?
that's really the only path I see forward because, in America, parents of course have the right to raise their children however they please. But the thing we can do is remove the profit motive
Yeah.
from this content, and that makes it very easy because I don't want you to, if you want to post photos, videos of your kids to share with family on social media, that's your prerogative.
Yes.
I'm just saying, let's stop making money off of kids who can't consent.
Exactly. Absolutely. Ugh. And it's sad that it does boil down to money in America, because we are in just this end stage capitalistic hellscape. The only thing that we can do is control the money. So that is our little discussion on Ruby Franke, Jodi Hildebrandt, the Eight Passengers saga, and how that relates to content with children in it and the way that children can function in these kinds of spaces. Really appreciate you, Amanda, coming on and talking to me about this. I imagine we will have many more DMs back and forth about this whole thing. Like the video. If you appreciate what kind of content I put out here, make sure to subscribe so you can see future videos. And definitely get in the comments section. Let us know what you think. I want to hear some more community thoughts on how we can approach this, because I am a longtime activist. So if there is a group out there that is organizing around this, there is the quit clicking kids. I will make sure that that is linked in the description. Other than that, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Again, thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me.